Story 1. Emma and Olivia, identical twins, had always felt a connection that went beyond the usual sibling bond. On their 10th birthday, their parents decided to take them to an isolated cabin in the woods, a surprise getaway. What their parents didn't know was the dark history attached to the cabin. Years ago, a pair of twin girls had gone missing from that very location, never to be seen again. Locals whispered about strange happenings, but the cabin remained standing, hidden away from curious eyes. The first night seemed calm, though there was a strange energy in the air. The woods outside were too quiet, and the temperature dropped suddenly as the sun set. Around midnight, Emma and Olivia woke up to the sound of scratching at their window. They were on the 2nd floor, and there was no tree nearby that could explain the noise. Olivia, the braver of the two, peeked outside and saw nothing but darkness. But the scratching continued, now louder, as if something was clawing at the glass desperately. The next morning, they told their parents, who brushed it off as animals in the woods. But that night, things escalated. The twins were woken again, this time by a soft giggle echoing through their room. At first, they thought it was the other laughing in their sleep, but then they realized the sound was coming from the foot of their beds. Two shadowy figures stood there, two girls identical to them, except their eyes were hollow, empty pits. The figures whispered, "You shouldn't be here. We were just like you, and we never left." Panicking, the girls screamed for their parents, but the door wouldn't open. The walls seemed to close in, and the air grew thick, making it hard to breathe. Their beds started to shake violently, and the shadows crept closer, their cold hands reaching for the twins. "Come with us," they whispered. "You'll never leave this place alive." Just when it felt like all hope was lost, their parents broke through the door, and the figures vanished. The family fled the cabin that night, but the horror didn't end there. Emma and Olivia both began having vivid nightmares, always about the same twin girls who appeared at the foot of their beds, watching them, waiting. Years later, they learned the truth. The twin girls who had gone missing at the cabin were believed to have been taken by something dark that lived in those woods. Their spirits were trapped, and now they wanted company. Jake and Ethan had heard the rumors for years. Deep in the woods, there was a cabin once owned by two sisters who were executed for witchcraft centuries ago. They were said to have practiced dark magic, and when the town discovered their rituals, they burned the women alive inside the cabin. But the sisters' spirits didn't rest. Some said they cursed the land, and anyone who entered the cabin would never return. Naturally, the legend only made Jake and Ethan more curious. They were thrill seekers, always chasing the next adrenaline rush. One autumn afternoon, they decided to head out and find the infamous cabin. The woods felt wrong as soon as they entered, a cold, unnatural chill that clung to their skin, even though the sun was still up. After a couple of hours, they found the cabin. It was old and crumbling, but it seemed oddly preserved, as though the forest itself was keeping it from collapsing. They hesitated for only a moment before stepping inside. The interior was eerily untouched. Old furniture, covered in dust, sat as though someone had just left moments ago. Strange symbols were etched into the wooden beams, and the air was thick with the smell of decay. They explored cautiously, but soon realized they were not alone. Jake noticed something out of the corner of his eye, a shadow moving, though there was no one else in the cabin. Ethan heard whispering, but the words were impossible to make out. Then the temperature dropped sharply, their breath visible in the air. That's when they saw them, two women standing in the corner of the room, their faces pale and contorted with anger. Their clothes were charred and ragged, their eyes burning with rage. "You've come to our home," one of them hissed. "You shouldn't have." Panicked, Jake and Ethan tried to leave, but the door wouldn't budge. The floorboards creaked under their feet, as if something was moving beneath them. Ethan tried to break the window, but as soon as he touched the glass, the walls started to pulse. It was as if the cabin itself was alive, trapping them in a tide. The sisters began to chant, their voices growing louder, and the symbols on the walls glowed with a sickly red light. Suddenly, Ethan was thrown across the room by an unseen force. Jake rushed to help him, but felt cold hands grip his arms, pulling him back. The sisters were now standing inches away, their breath cold and foul against his skin. "Stay with us," they whispered. "We're so lonely." Jake screamed for Ethan, who was still dazed on the floor, but then he felt something tighten around his throat. He couldn't breathe. The sisters' faces were now twisted into grotesque smiles. Just when Jake thought he would pass out, the ceiling cracked. Sunlight poured into the cabin, and the witches screamed, their bodies dissolving into smoke. In the chaos, Ethan had managed to break a hole through the roof, letting the light in and breaking whatever dark spell had been cast. They scrambled out of the cabin and ran, never looking back. Years later, both of them still dream of the witches. They wake up in cold sweats, hearing the voices of the sisters, whispering in the dark, "We're still waiting."